Hello everyone. This week is unusual in that I recorded a message earlier on in the week. I'm actually recording again on Saturday evening. I'm sure, like a lot of people, I was watching the updates and announcements from Boris Johnson earlier on this evening and felt it right to adapt what I'm sharing this week. Many of the points that I'm making and what I'll share is similar to what I'd shared earlier in the week in the first recording. But a lot has changed for lots of us in terms of our plans for the next week, and it just feels right to address that a little bit. So to share a little bit about that and about how it is that we might be able to respond to that. I'm gutted. I'm sure a lot of you are as well. Our plans have had to change. We're no longer going to be with all the people that we were going to be with on Christmas Day. And that's gutting, that's really sad, that's rubbish. We'd been really looking forward to that and we can't anymore. We aren't the only ones. You know, we're all in a similar position in lots of ways. But how do we respond to that? What can we do about it? We've been looking at this series over the last few weeks called Together at Christmas. Now, we remarked at the start of it that in some ways it's a slightly strange theme to choose this year, Together at Christmas, when lots of us aren't going to be able to be together at Christmas, certainly with the people that we'd want to be. But our series was never about that. Our series was never about being just together with other people. Our series was about God wanting to be together with us, that at the heart of the Christmas story is God's journey from heaven to earth, choosing to come close to us, choosing to be near us, choosing to be together with us. In many ways, we've been dealt a blow in the last few hours in terms of who we can be together with. That's certainly true for those of us who are here in Tier 4 now, but for everyone across this country who has gone from maybe 5 days of being able to be with people to just one. And in other parts of the world where restrictions are in place, we aren't able to celebrate the ways that we would want to. Christmas feels different, and that's just stepped up in the last few hours. So as we try and deal with that, as we try and come to terms with that, how can we process that? Well, the final part of our series was always intended to be titled Together with Strangers, when we looked at God inviting not just Mary, not just Joseph, not just those who were part of that close inner family, but also complete strangers, as he welcomed the shepherds into the story as well. And I still want to look at that. I'm going to look at it in a slightly different way and with a slightly different emphasis than I did originally. But I still want to look at that story because I think we see in the shepherds' reaction and response to being welcomed into this some really key things that we can do as we celebrate, as we choose to still celebrate this week. Now, the shepherds being included in the story is strange for a number of reasons. Shepherds, when we think of shepherds, we might think of a cute kid in a dressing gown and a tea towel on their head in a school nativity play. Or we might think of a modern day shepherd with maybe a sheepdog in tow and a flat cap and a big warm coat. When people in this time were thinking of shepherds, they would have thought of anything but that. They would have thought of something very not positive. They wouldn't have had a good impression of who shepherds were. Shepherds were these people who, as they travelled with their flocks from one place to another, they would come by a village or a town and they would often trash the place. They would go in and they might steal things. They were known for causing quite a lot of disturbance, for being very antisocial. These were communities that they weren't part of. They didn't care whether they were in a better state when they left them or a worse state, so they tended to leave them in a worse state. No one wanted the shepherds to come by. No one wanted the shepherds to come near. No one wanted the shepherds in town. But God did. This whole series that we've been looking about is God's desire to be together with people, to be together with everyone, to be close to everyone. And it doesn't just stop at those who are part of the club, those who are in the inner circle. It extends to everyone, including to these shepherds who no one else would have wanted to invite into their community. So we see God's heart in that, but actually what I want to do mostly is for us to focus in on the shepherd's response. Because I see a few things in the way that the shepherds respond to that invitation that I think we can still choose to adopt as we respond to God this Christmas. Now, I want to be clear that there are some times when it is easy to be joyful at Christmas, when it is easy to celebrate and be glad. this year it might be more of an effort for us. This year, as we seek to celebrate and as things have been once again pulled back and cut back, can I encourage us that we might need to adopt maybe an attitude of defiance this year? Not defiance as in breaking the rules and going against the guidance, defiance in the sense that we will choose to celebrate and choose to be glad because of the truth of Christmas, despite a lot of the trappings of Christmas having to change. So I want to read the story of these shepherds and then see what it is this week in particular that we can learn from their story. So let's look at this. It's in Luke chapter 8. I'm going to start reading at verse 15. It's just after God, through these angels, has announced to the shepherds that he wants to draw them in. And this is what we then see them do in response. When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about." So they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby, who was lying in the manger. When they'd seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told them about this child. And all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. But Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things which they had heard and seen, which were just as they had been told. What is it that we can learn from the shepherd's response? Well, there's three things that I want to share. Three responses that we see in them. The first is that they get stuck in. They don't hold back. They don't stay away. They've heard this message. And what's the first thing we hear? They say, "Let's go to Bethlehem. Let's see this thing that's happened." And we hear that they hurried off. They didn't hang back. They didn't wait. They didn't stay in the fields. They didn't stay where they were. They went. They chose to go. They chose to get stuck in. They didn't say, well, let's not bother. They didn't say, this probably isn't for us. They said, no matter what, we're going to go. We're going to be part of this. They didn't want this to be someone else's story. They didn't want this just to be someone else's celebration. They wanted to celebrate. They wanted to be part of things. They wanted to be included in this. And they ran. Can I encourage us that one thing that I think we can all still do this year is we can run and we can get stuck in to God. Now, we aren't going to be able to run to Christmas parties that we would have wanted to. We're not going to be able to run to be with family members in the way that we would have wanted to. We're not going to be able to run and get stuck in to a lot of the things. We're not going to be able to get stuck into a big family Christmas dinner, most of us. But we can still run and we can still get stuck in to God. These shepherds weren't just running to a celebration. They weren't just running to something that was fun, something that had been planned. They were running to be included in the story that God was wanting to tell. The God that I know, the God that we've been exploring this whole series, is a God that wants us to be up close and personal with him. That wants us to draw close to him. And we can still do that. We can get stuck in. We can make sure that we're drawing close to God this Christmas. Can I encourage you to make sure that that's something that you're doing? It would be so easy for us just to adopt the attitude that, well, Christmas feels cancelled this year. Christmas already felt as though it was going to be cut back and curtailed and smaller and less than what we wanted it to be. But now it's even more so. Now, well, Christmas is just done. Christmas is just cancelled. A few months ago, Boris Johnson said that he would do everything he could to save Christmas. Well, I guess by any measure that he meant when he said that, he hasn't managed. He hasn't managed to do what he'd hoped to do. I'm not saying that as a criticism of him. There's all kinds of different factors and different things at play, but he'd hoped to save Christmas. And whatever he meant by that, I think if you asked him today, have you managed? He would have to say no. It was clear in the tone, in the way that he was speaking. He recognised that this was not what he or others wanted, but it's what they felt they had to do. Can I remind you that Christmas, real Christmas, true Christmas, doesn't need saving. It's never needed saving. We aren't the ones who save Christmas. Christmas is what saves us. See, there's different kinds of Christmas. And of course, Boris Johnson wasn't claiming that he was going to try and save the Christian message of Christmas. He knew that was nothing to do with his role. That's nothing within his remit. What he was talking about was the festival of Christmas and being able to celebrate in the ways that we want. I guess partly the commercial side of Christmas. Now, those things haven't panned out in the way that he would have hoped. But Christmas, the message of Christmas, the truth of Christmas, is ultimately not about those things, and we know that. Which means we can still get stuck in to Christmas. Part of the message that the shepherds had received, just a few verses before what I'd read, as the angels filled the sky and declared who this Jesus who was going to be born was, one of the things that they described him as was a saviour, a rescuer, someone who would save us, someone who would rescue us. That is still true. That is still what Christmas is about. That's still who Jesus is. He's the one who rescues us. We can't save Christmas. Christmas saves us. God, through Christmas and through everything that would follow, saves us. Maybe you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I don't know about this. I'm not sure about this message. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if the truth of Christmas, this story of Christmas, if it has any truth. Can I encourage you as well? Get stuck into it, probe it, explore it, consider it for yourself. First thing we can do, like the shepherds, is to get stuck in, not to hang back, not just to let this be other people's celebrations, not to say, well, the way I'd wanted to celebrate things can't happen anymore, so I'm just going to cancel it. Wait till next year, and then focus on Christmas again. Can I encourage you, all of us, let's get stuck into Christmas this year. The second thing we see the shepherds do is that they share it around. We hear that they went and they found Mary and Joseph and the baby, and when they'd seen him, they went and spread the word concerning what they'd been told about him. Now, they hear this thing, they see this thing, and the first thing they want to do is to share it with someone else, to share it with other people. Now, I want to encourage us that while we may not be able to be around people in the ways that we'd want, in the ways that we'd planned, we can still share something of Christmas with others. That's going to look very different than maybe it could have been, but we can share a message, we can make a phone call, we can share Christmas with others. We may not be able to share a meal with others, we may not be able to give things around the way that we would have wanted to before, but we can still share Jesus this Christmas. If you're someone who has yourself, like these shepherds, gone and seen Jesus, met him, begun a relationship with him, got to know him, then can I encourage you to share that around, to find ways this year to share that around. And there's two things that I imagine they would have shared when they did. The first is the truth of the message. Notice that it doesn't just say they told people that they'd seen a baby. It says that they spread the word concerning what they had been told about this child. It wasn't just, they didn't just go and share some facts and figures. They didn't just say, a baby's been born, lying in a manger in Bethlehem, have a good day. They went and shared what they'd been told about this child, including what we just thought about, the fact that he was Saviour. Other words, that he was the Messiah, that he was the Lord. These were all things that they'd been told by the angels. And they went and shared, not just that a child had been born, but they went and shared what they had been told about this child. They went and shared the truth of it. They went and shared to people and said, a Saviour has been born, one who has come to rescue us, one who has come to ransom us. This Messiah, the one that's been promised for so long, has now arrived. The one who is Lord, the one who is our King, the one who will rule and reign over us in good ways, has arrived. They went and shared not just the facts, but what it meant, the purpose, the meaning behind it. I wonder who you might be able to share that with this year. Again, as I said at the start, this may be an act of will. Maybe something we have to defiantly and deliberately do this year. Because truth be told, we're not happy, we're not glad, we're not enjoying things in the way that we would be used to this time of year, and we're going to have to make ourselves remember that there is something bigger than the things that we're missing, that we've still been given and we've still received, and that's still worth telling people about, and that's still worth sharing. I'm not trying to undervalue or downplay the difficulty and the frustrations and the sadness, how gutted we might all be feeling. But can I encourage us that the truth is still true and the good news is still good? The second thing that they would probably have shared, whether they meant to or not, was the transformation that it had had on them. The impact it had had on them as individuals. See, as I said, these shepherds were people who no one wanted to be near, who would have been unpopular, who would have kept themselves to themselves, and other people would have been glad of it. So imagine the surprise for the people in the village, for the people in this community, when shepherds were coming up to them and telling them this amazing thing that they'd heard, that they'd received. We hear that the people were astonished, that they were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. Probably in part is because they were thinking, are these really shepherds? They're not behaving the way that shepherds are meant to behave. There's something different about them. There's something new. There's something strange about these shepherds. They're behaving in strange ways. Maybe something that they've encountered has changed them, has transformed something. They're different. They're not the way that they should be. Can I encourage you that the way that you behave, the way that you talk about things, the way that you hold yourself, the way that you conduct yourself in conversations, perhaps now more than most times, is an opportunity to show that there is something deeper and bigger and more secure in your life. What do I mean by that? Well, a few years ago for me, when my life was in a pretty rocky place, in fact a really, really low place, I was meeting up with a friend whose life was actually in a pretty decent place. On the surface, my life was very bad at the time. Lots of things were going wrong, and there were things that were out of my control, and I was in a bad place. On the surface, their life was going well. There were lots of things that were positive. There were lots of things that were good. But they were struggling to be happy. They were struggling to find joy in those things. They were struggling to find meaning in those things, even though they knew that they should. They knew that they should be happy. They weren't. And as we were talking, they said something to me because they knew that my life wasn't good. They knew that things weren't the way that they should be. They knew that I had lots to be upset about. But they heard in what I was saying some things that expressed hope, that expressed even a little bit of joy, that expressed that I knew things were going to be okay. And they didn't quite understand it. They said to me, how is it that you're happy when you should be sad, and that I'm sad when I should be happy? This Christmas, there's lots of reasons why we could all be sad. There's lots of reasons why we are sad. I'm sad. But there's also lots of reasons to have joy, to be glad, because God still wants to be together with us, because God still came, because God still demonstrated his intent not to stay far away, because God still came into the world and came into our lives. There are reasons to be glad. What an opportunity. Maybe as you're speaking with other people, maybe as you're sharing hope, sharing joy, even in the midst of all the rubbish, even in the midst of all the things that are bad, the things that are wrong, maybe there's an opportunity for you to show that there's something deeper, something more secure, that there's bigger things that you've been given than the things that have been taken away. Maybe you can set an example by your words, by your actions, by your attitudes, by your posture. Yes, celebrations have been taken away. Yes, time with family has been taken away. But there is so much that we have been given. If we choose to focus on that, if we choose to show the way that we've been transformed, the way that we've been given something greater, the way that we've got something more solid to stand on, there's an opportunity to show, just like these shepherds would have done, as they behaved in ways that other people would have seen as strange. There was something that amazed others about that. See, I want people to believe this message of Jesus coming and dying and rising again, partly because I just believe it is true, because I know it to be real, because I know it to be fact. But the other reason I want people to believe is because it's changed my life. Because no matter what else is going on, that is always something I can stand on. That is always a relationship I can count on. The shepherds shared it around. Will you? Will I? How will we do that? How will we let what's happened to us show when we speak to others? And the final thing that we see from these shepherds is that they allowed themselves to be filled up with the joy of this. Final thing we ever hear about these shepherds are these words: the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things they had heard and seen, which were just as they had been told. Just as they had been told. They went away and they were praising and they were glorifying. In fact, they didn't just go away, they returned. They went back to the place that they were. They went back to their lives. They went back to normality, but there wasn't anything normal anymore. They went back and they were praising and they were glorifying God because of everything they'd seen, which was exactly as they'd been told. They went back to the same place, but there was a new dimension. They'd allowed themselves to be filled up with the joy of this, with the good news of it, with the truth of it. And as they allowed themselves to be filled up with it, it overflowed into the way that they responded. It overflowed into their actions. It overflowed from them. Earlier this week on our Facebook, we had a guy called Ian King, who leads a church in Loughton, sharing with us as part of our daily Focus 15. And he used this image. He talked about how, like a toothpaste tube, when we get squeezed, what's inside of us comes out. When we get squeezed, when things are difficult, when they press in, when they pressure us, what's inside of us will come out. If we are angry and bitter and upset, then when we get squeezed, when life is difficult, that's what will happen. We'll snap. We'll become short-tempered. I wonder if anyone else has experienced that during lockdown. I know that I've done that a few times, that I've become short-tempered, that I've become grumpy, that I've become cynical, because there are parts of me inside that are those things. But other things can come out when we get squeezed as well. When we get squeezed, when there's pressures, when things are not going the way that we'd want them to go, gratitude can come out. Hope can come out. Peace can come out. Worship can come out. But in order for those things to come out, they've got to have gone in. They've got to have been taken in. These shepherds were overflowing in praise. They returned glorifying and praising God. They'd encountered Jesus. They'd encountered God. And because of that, they were able to express that. They were able to worship. They were able to let that out because they'd first taken it in. So we need to make sure that we're being filled up with the right things. We can choose to fill ourselves up on the news, on all of the things that are coming in all of the different people's opinions on those things, on whether it's right or whether it's wrong and what's going on. And we can choose to fill ourselves up on the hope of the vaccine. We can choose to fill ourselves up on anger at being restrained, at being constrained over this Christmas time. We can choose to fill ourselves up with all kinds of different voices. One thing we need to make sure that we are filling ourselves up with, just like the shepherds have been filled up with, is encounters with God, is time with him, is letting him and his voice speak to us. We are being pressed, we're being squashed, we're being constrained, we're being squeezed. What's going to come out? I know for me, I've been disappointed with some of the things that have come out of me this year. I've been surprised by some of the things that have come out of me this year. But I've also been glad, because it hasn't all been bad. Because there are things that God has placed in me, love and acceptance and embrace and grace and truth and joy, that no matter what is going on around me, are within me and will start to come out of me. But I need to make sure that I'm nurturing those things. What is it you're being filled up with? The shepherds had been filled up with Jesus, with this good news. And as a result, celebration came out of them. And wherever they went, back to the places where they lived and worked, celebration came out. Praise came out. Gladness came out. Joy came out. So, in this Christmas that looks very different than what we'd hoped for, in this Christmas that looks very different from what we want, as we're gutted, as we're trying to make new plans, as we're trying to figure it out, here are my encouragements from these shepherds to all of us. Let's get stuck in to Christmas, the real Christmas, the truth of Christmas, Jesus at the heart of Christmas. Let's get stuck into that this year. Let's find ways to share that around. Where others are finding it hard to find any hope at all or any joy at all, share what hope you've been given. Share what joy you've been given. And be filled up with the right things. Be filled up by encounter with God, by experiencing him. We've all got that choice. We've all got that choice. So the question is, how will you respond this year?